Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today it's taking another look at a politics show, Vox Pop, where, they interview a few left-wing people about what they think of reform, so let's just get into it.
Let's fix broken Britain, and let's start by making sure that reform local governments mend the pothole.
Yeah, it is very, very basic council stuff that is really annoying people. I know anecdotally for me, my council tax has gone up by about £20, and in return, the service I'm getting is that they are collecting the bins every 3 weeks rather than every 2 weeks. The excuse is, oh, we want to encourage you to recycle more. The real answer is probably because they don't want to pay the bin men for all the work that they're doing every 2 weeks. And given what's happened in Birmingham, you probably don't want to annoy the old bin men union.
Reform UK is contesting nearly all the 1,600 council seats up for re-election on the 1st of May, and Nigel Farage has big plans.
We probably need a Doge for every single county council in England.
Yeah, people are absolutely going to be voting for that. I know that Elon Musk isn't necessarily the most popular person in Britain, but people do like the idea of, oh, you're taking my money off me, do not waste it. Oh, you're looking into how you're wasting it and getting rid of that? Good. That is a vote winner. And yes, Reform have the most candidates out of any party. I'm being serious when I say this. Anyone who tries to say that Reform's a joke party, not serious, not serious about change either, just every piece of evidence we get, every single thing that Reform does, shows us pretty much the opposite. So, carry on.
Local elections are the first litmus test for Starmer's government, and with the popularity of Labour dropping in the polls and the Conservatives stagnant, could the Green Party position itself as the real opposition to reform?
Maybe for weed-addicted university students and, I mean proper socialists, yeah, maybe. People I know who are Green Party activists, they're just a bit mad. The only thing I've heard them complain about since Labour have got in, with the myriad of things they can complain about, is that they're not fully behind the environmental agenda. Despite Ed Miliband being in charge and being ludicrously net zero, despite the coal mine being shut down, despite no new oil and gas in the North Sea, despite all that, yeah, they're still pretty convinced that it's not good enough. So as I say, swivel-eyed loonies would probably vote Green. Let's see how many of them there are in Britain. I mean, I say that, to be fair, in local elections, people vote really weirdly in local elections, is all I can say. For example, one of my aunties is a Green voter. The only reason she's a Green voter for life is because she was really annoyed at Boris Johnson for having parties during lockdown, and a Green councillor canvassed her, and they basically had to go at Boris Johnson for half an hour, and now she's a lifelong Green voter. So, yeah, as I say, people vote really weirdly in local elections.
People have literally had enough of these two main parties. They want something different, and that's what Reform are promising. But actually, we know that they're run by billionaires, and that's the interests they had. They're not going to be looking after our NHS.
No, I don't think Zaya, Farage, Tice, or any of the donors are billionaires. I don't think they are run by billionaires. They're run by millionaires. That would be more accurate. But unfortunately, this councillor is probably a millionaire, so she can't say that. I mean, I'm not being funny, but there are factions of billionaires who are against each other. Not every billionaire is George Soros. However, saying that, the Greens are probably on the side of George Soros because they're probably, not directly, but possibly indirectly funded by him. I mean, I know for a fact that they have patriotic millionaires on their side because they're pushing for a wealth tax, which is all patriotic millionaires want. So, this is why they can't say millionaires are on the side of Reform, because millionaires are also on the side of the Greens. And there's just nothing that they can say that will absolve them of that irony.
They're not going to be looking out for our services. So it's very frustrating when people are being sort of sold a lie, in my opinion, and they definitely want an alternative, and I do think that's the Green Party.
It's really funny because the Green Party have had what the Green Party want, but in a kind of light touch way, on everything apart from environmental policy. But even the problem with the Green Party is that they are just full of rabid socialists with a mix of some, not necessarily Islamists, but certainly more fundamental Muslims, as we see with the election of some councillors in, say, Hare Hills. And that's mainly because they are very much on the side of the Gazans. And having a look at their manifestos in the past, effectively they are just the worst parts of the Labour Party on steroids. which is why they get all the socialist vote, and it's probably why an awful lot more young people are going to move over to vote Green because, well, for a lot of young people, this will be the first time they really are aware of a Labour government, and it's pretty dire. But they don't realise it's dire because they were sold snake oil, and they end up hitting a wall of reality, and the Greens are, frankly, bigger snake oil salesmen, because they want everything Labour wants, but on steroids. But nobody seems to realise that. So as I've been saying for a while, these places that are willing to vote for them, yeah, they need to put their hand on the stove. They need to realise that this is actually a very bad idea. And then you can end up with them moving way over to the right where we have most of the answers to most of the problems.
At the moment it's a Conservative-led council, but we definitely have a lot of reform interest around here. So, I mean, what they're offering is the same nationally. It's fear-based policies and blaming the immigrants for basically everything we have with what's wrong in our society.
I mean, it is quite funny, because Reform aren't really going on about immigrants when it comes to these council elections. The large reason for that is because, well, councils don't have an awful lot of power over immigration policy. In fact, they have basically none. Which is why instead he came in on a JCB saying we'll fill in the potholes, because he's focusing on what councils can actually do. Now when it comes to the MP campaigns in, say, Runcorn, where there's a by-election at the moment, that's where they are focusing on immigration. I believe next weekend they are going to do a big push on Reform will sort out the immigration problem. Obviously they can't do much if they end up getting 5 MPs again, but at the end of the day it's about making a name for themselves in Parliament. But when it comes to fear-based politics, the Green Party's main concerns are effectively climate cultism. Their politics of fear is the billionaires are going to kill the planet because they don't care about you. The billionaires are the problem. So to say, oh, Reform are just about fear-based politics on immigrants, well, I guess fear-based politics is actually okay when the target is right, which, you know, friend-enemy distinction, I understand all that. But at the end of the day, again, we have a government that is pretty aggressive towards millionaires and billionaires to the point where thousands of them have left the country and the country's getting worse. So maybe there's a correlation between billionaires, millionaires and the country doing well. But what do I know?
Although we're actually the 6th wealthiest country in the world, and yeah, we could have a wealth tax, and I think that's what we're missing here. It's the Green Party put forward a message of hope.
I mean, this is what I mean. Politics of fear. Oh, the rich are killing you. Just tax the wealthy. Yep, that'll do it. That's definitely going to work. Oh, well, you see, Norway did it. Yeah, Norway did it, and then they ended up losing a load of their millionaires and billionaires. We're already losing them. You know, you may raise a few million in the first year it happens. When the reality sets in, you know, you can guarantee that these millionaires and billionaires, an awful lot of them are moving. The only ones that will stay are the ones that benefit from the state subsidies under a Green Party regime. People like Dale Vince, for example. Actually, on the subject, and if he ever makes a video on it again, Gary's economics is basically the Green Party politics, hence I think he is actually a Green Party activist. He just doesn't exactly say that an awful lot. And that's because, in his mind, trading is about betting on the economy collapsing, effectively. The man still trades. The man, to my mind, is actually trying his best to try and collapse the economy. I do not buy that he particularly cares about other people. All I buy is that he's in it for himself. You know, you don't have a mental breakdown as a trader and then become the most altruistic person ever to then have policy that is effectively going to bankrupt the country. You just don't do that. Yes, I hate the guy so much that I'm willing to be the most uncharitable person on the planet towards him. He is not a good person. He is not moral. He is a man who still trades and yet tells everyone it's evil. So he thinks he's evil himself. So I'm going to assume he's evil.
This is one of the parts of the country where the Conservatives typically have a base. People thought that they had something to offer, and over 15 years of austerity, scandal, lies, corruption, people finally realising that the Conservative Party don't have their best interests at heart.
From people I know in Kent, and just to be frank, its proximity to Dover, I say proximity, Dover is in Kent, which is where an awful lot of the boat people end up landing. You know, these people will have been voting Conservative because, especially over the past few years, which is where they have been mainly coming in, and even before that when they were coming over on lorries, you know, it's Calais to Dover. Frankly, it is quite clear that it's going to be quite a anti-immigration area because they get they're the first port of call when it comes to these immigrants, and it's causing a few problems. There's been plenty of articles on the issues that they run into with boat people coming over. You know, they run through towns, knocking on doors, asking for phones and directions and things like that. I would be shocked if the Greens do well at all in places like, especially in small towns in Kent. They might do well in the university towns, such as Canterbury, but to the people that actually have to live there permanently, I can't see the Greens doing very well. They might do quite well with some mentalists, but not with the general public, I would imagine. But who knows? I might be shocked. And putting it down to austerity, again, we didn't have austerity. And when you hear about councils going bust, it does happen, but it is rarely Conservative councils. And so they're probably not as disgruntled with these councils as, say, Birmingham are with theirs. The real issue, I imagine, in Kent will be immigration and things like that.
Unfortunately, there's a gang of grifters that have stepped into that void. Reform UK. A lot of old Tory voters are looking at Reform because they think it's the answer, and Reform are appealing to new people who are just sick of the establishment parties.
I mean, frankly, calling these people grifters is pretty... in fact, it's incredibly ironic. An awful lot of the people in Reform, at the top brass, obviously barring the chairman, have been in politics for decades, literally decades. Richard Tice has been... Nigel Farage has been in UKIP for longer than I've been alive. You know, Lee Anderson, obviously, he went Labour Tory and now he's in Reform because that's what an awful lot of people have been doing, especially with Boris Johnson. They went, oh, Labour suck, right, we'll go to Boris Johnson to get Brexit done. Wow, that sucked, right, Reform seemed to be the real deal for what I voted for there. And it's quite funny to just hear them be grifters. It's not grifting to fill a gap in the political market, let's say. You know, you could technically call everyone in politics a grifter because they get paid for it. You know, it's not like back in the 1800s where you got absolutely no money from being in power and you relied solely on your other business practices. It's nothing like that anymore. Well, I guess if you were a Disraeli, you were relying on your wife, but still.
I think what it says about the area is that it's somewhere that's been left behind, somewhere that people feel like they're not listened to, they're disenfranchised, they don't feel they've got a voice, they don't feel like things can get better, and that's why they're looking to shake up the political system. People don't know what Reform UK's policies are.
I always do find it very strange how leftists and online righties have the exact same argument here. Nobody knows what their policies are, yet at the same time they are very willing to say, oh, they have mad policy on immigration. Obviously the online right don't think they go far enough, but either way, clearly then you have an idea of what their policy on immigration is. And I mean, this video itself, granted he was interviewed before the video was made, but either way, he will have heard Nigel Farage on the BBC saying, I want a Doge in every county council. Again, that's policy. We are going to cut waste in councils. First, we're going to have to obviously audit the councils, though. It's this weird idea that because you don't have the details of a policy set out, you don't have a policy. You know, net zero immigration is a policy. It's not even vague, that's actually quite precise. Now, the details of how it will work, obviously, they're not set in place, because I would imagine setting a cap sounds simple, but then who do you let in, who goes out, what are the second, third order effects of this policy? They need to be looked into, obviously, but they simply did not have the funding to do that because, you know, they weren't in Parliament and they were a relatively new party. Now they've had a few years and they've professionalised. Their plans and policy become slightly more obvious over time, and it becomes even more obvious when Labour starts attacking them, saying, oh, they want to privatise the NHS, and they keep saying, no, it will be free at the point of use, we will reform the way it works to not waste so much money. That is policy. And I get fed up with people saying that they don't have policy. It's just a really lazy attack. Same with calling them grifters. And if this is the level that the Greens are attacking Reform, I quite like Reform's chances in these elections.
YouGov have done polling of 4,000 Reform voters who voted for Reform in the general election. 70% of them believe in public ownership. 70% of them believe that billionaires get too much money.
Yeah, I'm well aware that the British people don't particularly understand economics too well. I am not shocked at that. And it's another problem with polling. It depends entirely on how the question was asked. For example, I don't know if this polling he was referring to was during a week where Thames Water was all over the news, because, yes, people don't particularly want companies that dump poo in rivers, despite the fact that, you know, I'm on the side of where else are they supposed to dump it when there's a storm, because they share the same pipes. Not supposed to go, but I also know that the British public are ill-informed, so when it comes to that, because of the media, by the way, but when it comes to that sort of thing, and they see, oh, billionaires want a bailout for Thames Water, what have you, it's like, oh, well, the billionaires are clearly earning too much money if they've let it go bankrupt. Yeah, I do agree, and I think they should lose money. However, do I think billionaires earn too much in general? No, not personally. And I think if you ask people, does Bill Gates earn his billions? Everyone uses a Windows computer, so I think they'd say, yeah, it's understandable. That's where you got to be careful with polling. It's not that polling's a fake, it's you got to realise the context of the poll, and that might indicate why answers are given the way they are. But Greens don't care about that. They'll see one poll saying, oh, people clearly hate billionaires, and run with it till the election. And then they'll lose again.
People don't actually know what Reform UK stands for, what Farage stands for. He wants to privatise the NHS. He wants to slash our benefits.
Yeah, again, I wish both those things are true, but they're just not. What reform policy actually is with benefits is effectively they're going to make it harder to get on, and if you're on out of work benefits, it's time limited to about 2 months, because realistically, it should not take more than 2 months to find a job. And with privatising the NHS, I mean, in every Brit's mind, that means he wants an American system. That's not what he means. He wants it like the German system, which isn't quite free at the point of use because you have to pay for medical insurance. However, it is pretty much all guaranteed by the state, which still funds the healthcare system to some extent, so that it's not breaking the bank like it does for a few people in America.
People aren't voting for reform because they know about the policies. Because they don't know about the policies, and if they did know about the policies, they wouldn't be voting for reform. They'd be voting Green.
Yeah, once again, this is just utter cope. It happened again, by the way. Reform don't have policies. Oh no, they do have policies. But then he lies about them. And then he says, oh, if they knew about the policies, they wouldn't vote for them. I mean, I know for a fact that over the last weekend, when it came to leaflets being sent out in Runcorn, it was a direct contradiction to, well, this exact lie, but from Labour, of they want to privatise the NHS. The leaflet effectively said, no, we don't want to privatise the NHS, it will be free at the point of use and we will protect it because it's a vote winner. We don't live in the ideal world where most people have an appetite for a German system. However, the worse the NHS gets, the more likely you are to get it, and to be quite frank with you, if Reform end up with about 400 MPs, they could probably do what they want for 5 years, and if people see an improvement over that, yeah, you're going to see a destruction of the NHS.
I'm here because I feel like there's a real threat of reform getting in these county council elections, and I just feel that it's really important to combat reform with a really positive Green voice.
You just absolutely love to see it. Again, it's something I hear all the time. Reform isn't a serious party. It's not a serious party. It's crazy. They don't even have policies. And then you end up with interviews like this, and frankly, mainstream attacks from, say, Labour, where effectively they are all clearly incredibly scared of reform winning, because you get right-wing councillors, and those right-wing councillors do well as well. So, it's not the end of the story if reform do really well in these elections. Then the left just lose all credibility, and frankly you end up with what happened in the 80s and 90s, which is 17 years of Tory governments. It's really funny. In fact, I think it was a Max Tempers tweet. Let me look. Yeah, this is a picture by Max Tempers, Citizens journalist, from the Diaries of Chris Mullins in 2005, where he's explaining to a few bin men about the absolutely insane policy and bills and acts that Britain has when it comes to equal pay. Because the recent issues with Birmingham bins and equal pay is not the first time we've had it in Britain, and yet nothing's been done about it. Because once again, they were facing a salary cut of up to a third. It's not quite bad these days. It's less of a cut than that, but it's still a cut nevertheless. And it's basically being explained to them that, look, the council literally can't afford to pay you. Oh, by the way, please don't go on strike. But as you can see near the bottom, there is no way that they could do anything but strike. And so Mullins asks if they remember what happened the last time they organised a strike by bin men, and they looked blank, to which he says 18 years of Tory government, and that did ring a vague bell. And the exact same thing is likely to happen under reform if all these councils keep mucking things like this up. Because frankly, these people get into the councils and they just seem incapable of seeing issues beyond the first order effects. Oh, we need to cut bin men's pay because we need to have it in line with dinner ladies because they're in the same band. I don't know why they don't move them a band up. Maybe that would then come under equal pay disputes or whatever. But nobody wants to attack equal pay because feminism is still massively popular within the UK. And this is the thing. It probably wouldn't be too bad if it was just you know, if female bin men are being paid the same as bin men, just use that as your defence. But it's not good enough with the Equal Pay Act back in the 80s, well, 70s that would have been, and it's got even worse now. You know, we're at a point where Next and Asda and probably other supermarkets are probably going to have to be looking at making massive savings in their budgets to end up paying shop floor workers the same as warehouse workers, despite the fact they are not the same job. But judges have deemed they are the same job, effectively because they both require high-vis jackets at certain points within the job. Yes, that is another true quote. Yes, that is from Max Tempers. But this is the thing. All these Green Party activists and Labour activists as well can say is, oh, well, they're grifters, they're just playing on politics of fear and what have you. And no, it's a lot more complicated than that. Britain is broken is a slogan. Our international reputation is that we effectively are a second world country teetering on the edge of being a third world country. And this is not the first time this has happened. The last time that happened, it was throughout the 70s, and we ended up with Margaret Thatcher. Now, is Nigel Farage our Margaret Thatcher? Hard to say. All I do know is that we have an incoming political earthquake, and I do not see why anyone would think that it is anyone other than Reform who is going to deliver that earthquake and actually shake things up. It's a basic rule of mine that if the left-wing establishment and the left-wing activists are scared of something, that something is probably good. There are obviously exceptions to that. People like Dave Smith obviously are massive morons, and the insipid creeping in of, say, anti-Semitism and neo-Nazism are obviously bad, and the left hate that. However, when it comes to basically everything to do with reform, I am going to trust that things that the left hate is the right thing to do under the banner of reform. And of some things in the Tories as well, of course. It's not just a reform thing. So yeah, as I say, trust the plan.
Reform don't have the solutions, but I feel like we do as a party. So it's important to understand what the problems are on the doorstep and hopefully, sort of tell the great things that Laura's doing here.
Again, it's another really strange accusation from the Greens that Reform don't really have policy and we do. And I'm actually yet to hear anything other than a wealth tax that is policy from the Greens here. Because all these have been is effectively baseless attacks on Reform yet again. I couldn't tell you from these interviews what Green policy actually is other than keep Reform out, which is hilarious because literally 6 months ago it was keep the Tories out.
You've been out door knocking this morning. When you're knocking on the doors, are you hearing lots of support for Reform?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, this is largely within my anecdotes too. There seems to be a lot more open support for Reform than there used to be. Largely because the two major parties are just a mess, and nobody really knows who the Greens are, to be honest with you. It was quite funny. When I was leafleting, I did see a Green activist as well delivering... It wasn't really leaflets. They were proper letters, which I assume had Green Party stuff in. I know that because she told me she was a Green activist, by the way. But there was someone who told me, oh, there was someone leafleting before, but they didn't seem to even know which party they were part of. And that seems to be kind of the thing with the Greens. It's, well, who are they? And people that do know who they are basically just know them as effectively neo-socialists and don't particularly want to vote for that because we've had a century of socialism apart from the Thatcher era, and people didn't like it. So what's their plan for this?
So like I say, at the moment, it's currently a very Labour-dominated area, the place I'm standing in. But that vote has absolutely fallen away. I've heard people say to me that they've been tearing up Labour literature as it comes through the door.
I mean, that's certainly true, but there's always people who are going to tear up and throw away leaflets from parties that they hate. You know, I had one woman who refused a leaflet from me and told me to grow up, which I took as a massive compliment, and I felt too bad telling her that I'm nearly 30. However, it wouldn't shock me if there is certainly an uptick in the amount of people doing that with Labour leaflets, and when it comes to Reform leaflets, I would imagine it's the same as it's always been. Nigel is definitely a love-hate figure. However, I think there are more people on the fence than there were, and I think the people that were on the fence are also slightly moving towards, well, let's give him a chance. Because remember, an awful lot of them gave him a chance with the EU elections back in 2019. That was directly a protest vote with the Brexit Party when Farage was in charge, to force the Tories to do something. And so they did. We got Bojo in, and it turned out that he was not as trustworthy as we all thought. So maybe Farage is a lot more trustworthy. The only way to find out is by voting, so we'll find out, I guess.
So people have really had enough. And do you know what? I understand that, because we've had 15 years of austerity, and we had a little bit of hope when Labour government got in, and they've carried that on. They've not changed that. They've not given anyone any reason to feel any differently.
Man, it's like the reality that Farage and co have been pointing out for years is actually true. And when you say, oh, I'm going to actually have fiscal rules that I'm going to stick to and not borrow like the Tories, and it turns out that there's no money because there's not been money since the 2008 crash, well, it turns out that you have to do something about reality. Oh, we're going to go for growth then. Inflation instantly goes up to nearly 3%. It did come down again today, to be fair. But you don't really have to do much to bring inflation down, to be honest. Tax receipts already going down. Millionaires and billionaires who you were going to try and make the pay pigs, they're gone as well. Nuts how second and third order effects exist, and Labour have no idea what they do. But, man, the Green Party don't even really understand first order effects, so they're going to be way worse if they get anywhere near power.
So definitely on the doorstep, we're having these messages, and people are looking towards reform. Obviously, like I say, they're blaming immigrants for the issues. But actually, like I say, we could have a wealth tax. There is different ways of doing this.
It's just what I love about the whole left-wing reaction to the whole immigration problem. Just pretend that it's not a problem and say it's actually the rich. You know, these people, especially in Kent, will have first-hand accounts of the issues with immigration, and effectively you're trying to tell them just ignore that. I cannot see that working. You know, Greens might get a few more councils in, say, areas of, I don't know, Bristol, Brighton, you know, areas around there where their strongholds are. I cannot see them doing well in these, frankly, Tory heartlands, where the more suburban town areas might go more reform, the rural areas you might see stay Tory, but it's hard to say. You know, the Tories are panicking. The Tories are having to close down HQs because they can't afford it these days. And as we keep looking at the polls, yes, it's true that Reform have stagnated a bit over the past couple of months, thanks in part to their association with Trump and how bad he's been over in America with, say, Ukraine. Not that he's necessarily been bad with that, just that a lot of people are very much purely Ukrainists. And Trump is effectively going against that, we'll say. Plus the whole tariff thing, and obviously it's political canon that Reform are, well, associated with Trump. So that was a large reason for the stagnation. The low thing obviously will have hit them a bit. But especially with this whole Scunthorpe thing and these council elections, they seem to be starting an uptick again. So don't be surprised if they take control of a few councils, especially in the Red Wall, which is where they feel mostly betrayed and left behind.
But these myths that they're perpetuating are encouraged by the media. Actually, the Labour government are jumping on this bandwagon.
Yeah, it's like they've realised being pro-immigrant really doesn't do you much favours. It maybe gets you quite a few student votes and ludicrous left-wingers voting for you, but, you know, if they wanted to keep doing that, they would have kept Corbyn. But they didn't, so no wonder they're changing tact.
So what chance do people have in having a different thought process on what the real issues are? So I feel like that's the message we're trying to put out there.
Hilarious. Again, like the accusation that Reform doesn't have any policies or plan, and our plan is just to, you know, let people know that Reform is the problem and immigrants are not. Okay, well, what's your solution to all this? What are the real problems then? Wealth tax billionaires. Oh, okay. I don't think that's going to get you elected into councils, but what do I know?
Laura just seems to be someone who is visible. And I think that's really important to me, that specifically for this area, which is the area that I believe Laura is in and around, she is always visible and she's seen and people see her and she's on Facebook and she's very active in the community. So that for me would be a particular reason to vote for her.
Yeah, this is also another incredibly important point when it comes to council elections. People absolutely love, and I mean love, seeing visible councillors. They love the doorstepping. They love the idea of being heard. So if that is what you're doing, then you have a pretty good chance of winning in council elections. You know, the people I know who've been councillors in all sorts of parties, this is effectively what they say. It's like, you just got to go, you got to spend basically 2 hours a day after work and what have you, just going around door to door in areas, knocking on doors saying, hello, I'm your candidate. You know, here are the problems I think we have in the area. Do you agree or not? And as I say, my auntie is now a lifelong Green voter because of that. I don't know if it's necessarily in the general elections as well as local elections. I'll have to find that out, but I know for a fact that she pretty much only votes Green in the local elections. So it's all because of doorstepping. Like, honestly, it's massive for local elections.
So you'll be voting Green at this council election then?
Definitely. Because I'm a teacher. I'm a science teacher in particular. So I do teach about global warming and climate activism and stuff.
Whoa, that was a big mask slip, wasn't it? I'm a teacher. I teach about global warming and climate activism. Why, as a science teacher, are you teaching about climate activism? Excuse me? The most I ever learned about climate activism was in geography classes, and that was mainly to say, oh, this is how people protest. It wasn't particularly saying you should be an activist or anything like that, but then again, this was 12 years... No, that would be longer than that. I dropped geography at GCSE. This was 14 years ago. Oh my god, I'm old. But either way, the point I'm making is that if you were taught about... there's no science or geography teacher at the time who'd say, I teach about climate activism. They'd say I teach human geography along with physical geography like rivers and things like that. Human geography being populations and what have you, demographics, immigration, things like that. They'd never phrase it like that, but this is the issue we have in schools. We have teachers who are openly left-wing activists, and their job description is teaching young people activism. That is a mask slip and a half. No wonder he's voting Green.
So if I don't follow the cause myself, so I can't be a teacher teaching it. If I don't believe it, I shouldn't be teaching that to my children.
And people wonder why teachers are basically seen as a very, very low status profession, let's say these days, by right-wingers. It's because an awful lot of them seem to fall into a rather radically left-wing mindset, and then, as we say here, actively become activists, and then even admit that they're just teaching activism. The amount of people I know who either didn't care about politics or were even right-wing and went into teaching and, went left-wing is ridiculous. I can't remember the polling at the moment, but it's in the 90%. 90% of teachers are left-wing or something like that. And obviously that's not helped by the fact that many of them are women as well, and women are typically left-wing as well, or are more likely to be left-wing, I should say. It seems to be a very left-wing profession these days. I'm not sure why. I think it's because they're, public sector. They have public sector unions, and typically they are just breeding grounds for spreading left-wing nonsense. So there you go, and now they've got a load of Green voters. Great.
Why do you view the Greens as being that alternative as opposed to, Labour or the Conservatives?
What type of question is that? What do you mean, why are they the alternative to the two mainstream parties? Shouldn't it be instead of, say, Reform UK or the Lib Dems? Why are you asking about the two mainstreams if you're asking about alternatives?
Well, Labour and Conservatives have basically become the same. Labour have come in, they've really let down a lot of people here. That's what we're hearing on the doorstep. They thought Labour would be different, but they're just the same as the Tories.
Yeah, by the way, when most people have taken that red pill now, they mean they're too right-wing. That's what a lot of people think, and I even heard that from people last time. I always say I don't understand why left-wingers complain about being politically homeless when they have about 6 choices in every election, especially if you're in Scotland or Wales. And yet they always say, no, they're all too right-wing. Like, I know a lot of people who think like that, and the only people I see who, they now seem to agree with it now, but the only people who are right-wing and say, yeah, they're the same and too left-wing are effectively people over the age of 40, which I just find mad. So while we still have these right-wing generations in the, upper ages, let's say, this is probably our one chance to get reform, and they have to deliver. If they deliver, you're going to get an awful lot of right-wingers being born out of that. Another way to get them back is a lot of right-wingers do just leave the country because it's such a left-wing hellhole. And the people who are left behind, they don't think it's left-wing enough. So, this is another part of the reason why there seems to be an ever move leftward. But as we say, reform seems to be the last chance to actually stop us becoming a third world hellhole. Labour haven't particularly helped in that regard. Greens are going to make it a hell of a lot worse. But as long as the unions are supporting Labour, they'll still have power. And unironically, it looks like reform might be getting some support from the Labour unions, which would deal a hell of a blow to Labour. It's long-term political policy and tactics. I don't like public sector unions. However, if they are going to be used to our advantage, why not use it?
So we understand why people think that, you know, they want change and reform could be that, but they're really not. And Laura's been working really hard in the community. The Greens are offering a positive thing of a wealth tax and other policies that will really make a difference in people's lives.
Oh, you've got loads. It should be, you know, it's amazing. All three of the Green activists, that they've interviewed have only brought up the wealth tax. That is the only policy that they're going on about. They can't even do that in councils. The councils don't have the power to enforce a wealth tax. Like seriously, what policies do you have for the local council? I have no idea. All you're going on is about this national wealth tax, which you have no power to actually implement. The best you can say is please don't vote reform. They'll actually do something about the immigrants. You know, to most people, that's just your terms are acceptable. What?
We're just hearing that people are really struggling. You know, they're fed up. Labour and the Conservatives are the same. They're not offering any change for people's lives, and that's why, the Green Party can really sort of change that.
Oh God, I mean, the amount of times that Reform get accused of just having nothing but platitudes, having no policy whatsoever, and then for the Green Party to say this 3 separate times, where the only policy they can cite is a wealth tax. I mean, how serious of a party is that? I mean, seriously, you want to see an unserious party, just look at the Greens at any point in time. Honestly.
Do you view the Green Party as a left-wing alternative to reform?
Yes, I do, actually. We're a party of social and environmental justice.
Yeah, a few months ago, I think before the election, I was saying things like this, that, you know, after Labour completely implode, you might see effectively the Greens taking them over, but it depends what the unions do. But I don't think they're actually going to manage it now, because they are basically seen as the party of student politics, worse so than, say, the Labour Party. And unions, from the looks of it, I don't think they'd want to go green, because I think unions are willing to go along with the net zero stuff to kind of virtue signal to the point where it's not going to shut them down. Well, it's shutting an awful lot of them down now, and well, frankly, I think they'd rather hedge their bets with with the party that doesn't want their industries to be closed down. Because the only reason that a lot of our industry isn't profitable is because of our energy prices. It's not like it was back in Thatcher's day where we were keeping coal going for basically no reason. I mean, it was literally losing money, and there's not a lot you can do about that. Whereas there's a lot we can do to fix energy prices, the main one being get rid of net zero. Oh, Reform want to do that. Look to nuclear power. Oh, Reform want to do that. Keep using oil and gas. Oh, Reform want to do that as well. And, you know, the unions will likely move over, especially the industrial unions will move over to Reform because, well, their interests are parallel. You know, Reform been talking about nationalising steel for 6 years, and Labour aren't even thinking of doing that because they think it'll cost too much. It's incredible.
So, obviously, Labour are actually called the Labour Party, but they're not standing up for the working person, or in fact, people who, you know, we've got the most vulnerable in society being targeted now. You've got people who are pensioners, you had poorer families, and now people who are disabled.
Yeah, it's quite funny. An awful lot of Reform activists and voters are saying exactly the same thing and have exactly the same concerns. Again, I don't particularly see how the left-wing credentials of the Green Party are going to outstrip the fact that Reform are literally talking about the exact same issues. Like, how are you going to beat them? Because, again, Reform have almost a multi-layered plan on what they can do to improve these conditions. All the Green Party have is, just wealth tax, just redistribute it. It's like, we have been through that for pretty much the last decade and a half. And I mean that unironically. We've never had a higher tax burden. We've never had higher spending, especially with redistributive policy and spending. We're halfway to the Greens' world, effectively, and they're never going to be happy. Doing more of it is not going to fix it. I don't care what Gary Stevenson says. It's wrong. You need growth. Even Labour understand it. They just don't understand how you do it. They think taxing people to oblivion leads to growth. It's actually the opposite. Less tax means more growth because there's more money to be reinvested into growing companies, business, and, as a result, wealth. And that, I hate to say it, but the growing pie will end up meaning that a lot of people who are working for these companies end up with more money in their wage packages. It's basic economics.
You know, we should not be targeting these people. We've got the wealth in this country. It needs to be more equally distributed.
Right, I've got a graph on screen. This is the Gini coefficient of the United Kingdom. From the late 70s to the early 2020s, For those who don't know, a Gini coefficient of 0 means that you have a perfectly equal society, so the higher the number is, the less equal the society is. During the absolutely horrific times of the 70s, we had more equal distribution. As you go through the 80s, obviously it starts to go up until you get to the 90s, where basically everyone agrees we're in a pretty good time, along with the early noughties as well. You then hit 2008 and things start to become more equal, ironically, and things have only been getting more equal since, although it's been going up and down. Conclusion. Being more equal by this correlation does not mean a better country. I am fed up of hearing this nonsense. Unequal societies are actually a good thing. Obviously, we don't want anyone in poverty, but what absolutely no green activist acknowledges, despite every other left-winger acknowledging this, is that the rising tide has indeed raised boats. You do not see the poverty that you will have seen in the 60s and 70s in the 2010s and 2020s. It does not exist anymore. Yes, you get homeless people, but we don't have slums anymore. You know, we did anyway have homes for everyone, but then Boris wave hit. You know, the actual thing that makes a country good to live in is the rate of growth. You know, you can say GDP line go up all you want. The fact of the matter is that if GDP per capita is going up, I know it's not the best measure of economy, but if it is going up, typically you see an increase in living standards, wages, purchasing power, what have you. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And our biggest issue over the past decade and a half, it's been completely stagnant. Immigration did not affect it. It didn't make it go up. The mass immigration experiment has failed. This is why Labour are even saying it as well. And the Greens are saying, no, we just need it, but more. This is what I mean. They want the worst policies that we have, but on steroids.
Greens Organise is a left-wing network within the Green Party of England and Wales. We've got a vision for the Green Party as a bold campaigning force.
Cool. You got any policies?
That articulates the anger that so many of us, millions of voters and thousands of people in the Green Party, feel towards our electoral system and establishment politicians. And we think that the Green Party can be more boldly articulating that vision.
So from what I gather here, Green Organise is a left-wing organisation within the Green Party, well, of course it's a left-wing organisation, who effectively want it to be known that a lot of them are not happy with establishment figures. Right, okay. How is that meaningfully any different to, well, a lot of organisations in Reform who are saying the same thing, but at least they have policy to back it up, I wonder?
Are the Green Party the left-wing alternative to Reform?
So Greens Organise are running a campaign around the country that we're calling Taking the Fight to Reform.
Again, just to make it very clear again, nobody's taking the Tories seriously. This is absolutely fantastic for Reform and devastating for the Tories, and yet I don't really see mainstream Tory figures seriously doing anything about this, apart from maybe Robert Jenrick, you can say, and Nick Timothy, who, yes, granted are in the shadow cabinet, but what's Kemi Badenoch doing about any of this? You know, she's still playing Clash Royale on her phone in the car until 12 in the afternoon. Who knows? But this should be devastating. Labour attacking Reform. They made about 12 attack tweets last week. You know, they've been sending out leaflets saying, don't vote Reform, they'll get rid of the NHS. So Reform had to effectively put out that fire with their own leafleting campaign. You know, the attacks on the Tories have effectively ceased. Like, Reform in the new game in town. Why would you not be happy about that? Online, right, I mean.
We recognise that millions of voters are angry at the political system, angry at the empty suits shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic, looking for something different. But we know that Reform UK are not something different. They are more of the same, if not worse, for ordinary working people.
They were literally... Well, they're not, because the Greens were probably on this side as well. In fact, no, the Greens are on the side of nationalisation. This is the funny thing. The Greens' only decent policy, which is only decent insofar as don't look into what they want to do beyond nationalising. When they want to nationalise, they want to effectively make it completely net zero, which is going to cost billions and might not even work. But anyway, I suppose this is my point. The Greens have bad policy because of second, third order effects of what they want to do beyond just the tagline of, say, tax the rich or nationalise everything, I guess. Reform are a lot more specific with their policy. It's nationalise steel because we need it to supply defence, manufacturing with, you know, guns and tanks and what have you, and help building infrastructure as well. And they also say at the same time, oh yeah, we really need to bring these energy prices down because they're crippling us. all the Greens care about is, oh my god, the world's on fire, we need to do what we can to save it. You know, get the teachers to teach climate activism. This is what I mean by student politics. I don't care what anyone says anymore. Anyone saying reform doesn't have policy, just ignore them. They don't know what they're talking about.
And the Green Party is the only party right now that it seems is standing up for people and standing up for the values that we all share.
What values, what policy do you have beyond billionaires bad? Let's tax them 2% every year. What's your plan for if they do move? What's your plan for if the tax receipts are nowhere near the level you thought they would be? What's your plan for when inevitably the net zero plan gets way too expensive and doesn't work and Britain just grinds to a halt and becomes impoverished? What's your plan then?
I think there's lots to be hopeful about, and there's lots of places where I'm really confident that Green is going to be making gains. And honestly, I think as a Green Party, we can do more. We can be bolder. We can articulate that anger better. And we can build for the future.
This is it. This is what I mean. What do the Greens have? Oh, we just need to build up more anger and, you know, gain votes off it. And they will. They'll gain votes off Labour from it, absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And they probably will gain some council seats while Labour lose theirs. But I cannot see them running councils any better than Labour say. I cannot see them being popular just by going on about billionaires the whole time. You know, people use their Windows PCs every day. People use their iPads. You know, people, believe it or not, with their revealed preferences, understand that billionaires are going to make a lot of money if everyone on the planet is buying their products and software. And, well, guess what Reform said about the billionaires in Thames Water, if we want to focus on that? Oh, let them fail. Let them lose money. You have to let them go bust. Otherwise it's not a free market and they cannot deal with the consequences of failing. If you don't let these failing businesses fail, the free market isn't working. And if it needs to be nationalised temporarily to keep people having water until it can be sold off to Brits, fair enough, do that. That's their plan. That's much more robust policy than just tax them 2% and, you know, nationalise the damn thing forever. You know, we've been through a period of taxing the rich and nationalising everything. You ended up with Margaret Thatcher. Why not just skip the middleman and go straight to Margaret Thatcher 2.0? But this time round, actually destroy the unions and remove any sort of political power that the left have that they haven't been elected into, because that's what Margaret Thatcher didn't do enough of, unfortunately. You know, she was great. She wasn't perfect, though. And then you end up with Tony Blair, who effectively lied to the country about what he was going to do and who he was. You know, the heir to Thatcher. Okay, well, he ended up not really doing an awful lot of Thatcherite things. So, there we go. Anyway, that'll do it for today's video. So, there is a Laughing at the Guardian tomorrow. Obviously, there was a stream yesterday on this channel. That'll be being moved over to the Worcester Club as soon as it's available to download and then upload to the Worcester Club. All about the way that the CIA and America managed to actually export its power without directly using the military. It was a good watch. Next week it's Tosh News, that'll be on Tuesday, so do look forward to that. Videos out as and when I can make them. If you want to help the channel, subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, become a channel member, or give super chats or super thanks. They are great ways to help the channel. And with that, it's everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.